Well, it came right through Anderson. And on May the 1st of 1865, we had what was called Brown's Raid in Anderson. There were a group of Yankee raiders, and I think, were there around 400 of them, Julia? About 400, who came into town and wreaked absolute havoc. They tortured people, they actually shot a few people, they vandalized homes, and they stopped here at this place. Major Anderson being pretty far up in the Confederate officers, they figured that Mrs. Anderson, and they were very prominent families, they may have known the whereabouts of Jefferson Davis when he came through. Actually, they didn't. But the story goes that Miss Anderson was here that day, and she still had about 8 or 9 of the little girls here. And there were little girls that ranged in age from about 5 to about 12. And she taught them things like sewing and painting and things like that. Well, they were in the dining room eating dinner, and it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they said that they heard this thunderous sound, and they knew that there were horses coming. And so she came out to the front, on the front piazza, and looked, and they saw a column of soldiers riding down the drive, and dust just flying everywhere toward the house. And of course, being hearing all the horror stories that you've heard about Sherman's army and about what they did to young girls and people, she was terrified. So she went back in the house, and she told the servants to just continue serving dinner as they had done. So they were sitting at the table, and they said about 80 or 90 Union soldiers came down the road, surrounded the house, and immediately started ransacking the outbuildings. There was a smokehouse where they had the meat hanging. There was a seed house. There was a grist mill and a cotton gin down on the creek. They had already set those on fire. They had taken the hens out of the smokehouse, and they were actually shooting the animals in the yard. They shot the cow, the milk cow. They were butchering whatever animals they could, because what they did is they tried to deprive the family of food. And said that one of the officers and a subordinate actually dismounted and led the horses up on the back porch, on the back piazza, into the hallway. And came into the dining room and told Mrs. Anderson to get out of the house, that they were going to burn the house down. Well, there were several men that followed them in, immediately went upstairs and started breaking open the chest of drawers and going and taking the silver and the ladies' dresses and things like that. And she was evidently must have been a really calm, brave lady, because she said, go ahead and do what you're going to do, but this is probably going to be our last meal here. She said, you're obviously stealing all my food, my provisions, and we're not going to have any food. She said, let us have our last meal, and won't you and your man sit down and eat with us? And so she invited the officer and his man to sit down and eat with them. And so they did. With all this, I can't imagine eating with all this chaos going on around the house. All these men in the yard doing what they were doing. And so after dinner, she calmly invited him to go across the hall into the music room, and she taught music. This was the only house in Anderson that had a piano, a harp, and a harpsichord in it. She was very accomplished in all of those. And she asked him to come in and have some of her husband's pipe tobacco, and she got some of the girls to play music for her. And so the story goes that they liked her so much and they admired her so much that they ordered everything that had been stolen from the house to be given back. And they left the house unharmed and went on their merry way. Of course, they had burned some of the buildings down and taken all the meat and killed the animals. But they left the house unmolested because of her bravery. She also was a member of the Eastern Star. So that may have had something to do with it as well, because a lot of times if you were a Mason, you also helped protect the women who were in the Eastern Star. But that was the story that Mrs. Chapman told me about her great-grandmother and what had happened in this house. There were some clues as to that. I looked and looked to see if I could see them, and I can't see them anymore. But they left the horses tied up to the newel post in the hallway for about 3 hours or so while they were doing all this. And they said that for many, many years you could see the scuff marks from the hooves and the manure stains in the floor where the horses had gone to the bathroom in the hall here. They must have been small horses. And a lot of the folks were riding, I guess, Arabians, which were kind of small horses. But I think they led the horses down the back porch. The back porch is in terrible shape, but those are the original floorboards that the horses walked across, and that's why they're still there. So what I've tried to do here is preserve as much as I can of the original fabric, and then add to it where things were gone and replace things appropriately. So with that, I'm going to end my talk.